What's going on, everyone? It's Adrian from Draft Diamond. We're back with another picks video. Now, in this video, I'm going to go over the main FanDuel slate for tonight. We got a nice little 5-game Thursday slate. Now, the way I'm going to structure this video is I'm going to go team by team and take a look at each player for each team. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to run 150 lineups using the Optimizer. And then I'm going to run 150 lineups using the Sims tool. And then I'm going to compare the player exposure for each of those 150 lineups. But before I do that, I want to ask you guys a favor. If you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you go ahead and do that. Right now, we're at 614 subscribers, but I'd like to get that number to over 1,000. So that would be greatly appreciated. So as far as key questionable players, you got Halliburton, Josh Giddey, and Zach LaVine, all questionable. Josh Giddey came back last night, had a pretty good game. Zach LaVine, something's going on. He's listed as questionable for personal reasons, but he was actually upgraded from doubtful to questionable. So I do expect him to play. And then Halliburton, he missed the game last night. I do expect him to play. I think maybe they were holding him out for the first game of a back-to-back. And I do expect him to play tonight. And that game starts at 7, so we'll know before lock whether or not he's playing. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the first game of the slate. You got the Knicks at Charlotte. So let's take a look at the Knicks first. Now, the Knicks have a pretty good matchup going up against Charlotte, especially the forwards. Charlotte is ranked 29th against opposing forwards, which is why guys like Josh Hart and Anunoby are projected so high. And Josh Hart gets picked up by the Optimizer a whole bunch. So does Miles McBride. And I like their matchup, but those are actually two guys I would consider fading because they're not exactly cheap. Josh Hart, $8,100. Miles McBride, $6,200. So I'm not too crazy about either of those guys. I think maybe you even consider fading Josh Hart for Anunoby, $7,200. He's $900 cheaper. Or maybe you even consider fading them for Mikal Bridges, $6,500. And who knows, maybe Bridges ends up outscoring both of those guys, Josh Hart and Anunoby. So that's a potential angle you could take there. But besides them, not too much value there. There's not a whole lot of value at center tonight, so maybe you consider throwing in some Towns. He hasn't really had a big game recently. He's been pretty consistent, in the 40s, 30s. He's averaging 39.48 over his last 10, so he's actually trending down. But he has a pretty decent matchup tonight against Charlotte, and he's under $10,000. And there's not a whole lot of value at center tonight, so maybe you throw him into some, and if he gets you 50 or 60, you're in pretty good shape. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at Charlotte now, who have an awful matchup against the Knicks. You got LaMelo and Bridges, both probable, so it's looking like both of them will be back for this game. They missed the last game, and the Hornets ended up suffering without them. They got blown out. Mark Williams was a guy that everyone was really high on, and he didn't do too much with those guys out. But if you are going to consider anyone from Charlotte, maybe throw 5% LaMelo Ball just in case he gets you 50 or 60. Bridges, he's had some pretty good games. He's had a 66-point game and a 63-point game in his last 10. I don't expect them to do this against the Knicks, but just in case, you could throw them into maybe 5% of your lineups. Daquan Jeffries, maybe you throw him in 5%. Mark Williams, you could throw him in 5%. Just because all these guys are going to be pretty low owned. And you look at Daquan, he had a pretty good game last game, 32 minutes, finished with 30 fantasy points. Now, granted, that was with no Miles Bridges or LaMelo Ball, but still has some pretty decent potential at $4,400. No one really else, though, on Charlotte that I would consider picking up. But let's go ahead and take a look at the next game. You got Brooklyn at the Pacers. So let's take a look at Brooklyn now. And Nick Claxton actually ends up getting picked up by the Optimizer. Because like I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of value at that center spot. I'm not really crazy about Nick Claxton at $6,100. I mean, obviously, we're going to get pretty decent exposure to him just because he gets picked up by the Optimizer. But there's some other potential spots at center that you could throw in there that have the potential to do a little bit better, in my opinion, than Nick Claxton. But, I mean, at $6,100, he could give you 40, which he's done twice in the past 10 games. And if he does that, then you're in pretty good shape. Also, I'd consider some D'Angelo Russell. I forgot to mention both Cams are out. Cam Thomas and Cameron Johnson are both out. So D'Angelo Russell is a guy who has some potential. He could give you one of those D'Angelo Russell, 40 to 50 point games and break the whole slate. So I'm definitely going to get some exposure to D'Angelo Russell. Also, Keon Johnson with no Cam Johnson or Cam Thomas. I'm not going to go too crazy with him, though, although he is going to have pretty decent ownership, so he's not exactly a sleeper pick tonight. Same goes to Zaire Williams. Now, this guy right here, Noah Clowney, didn't do good last game, 4.9 points, but he finished with 17 minutes, and that was with Cameron Johnson playing. So I actually do expect him to get in the low to mid 20 minutes, and at $3,900, he might have some pretty decent value. You see, he's going to have decent ownership just because I think other people are going to pick up on that. So he won't exactly be a sleeper play, but you do want to get some exposure to him at $3,900. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the Pacers now. And like I mentioned earlier, Tyrese Halliburton is questionable. I do expect him to play. If he doesn't play, Andrew Nembhard had a huge game last game, finished with 38.6, 31.6 minutes. So if Halliburton ends up missing the game, definitely want to get some exposure to Andrew Nembhard. Although he won't exactly be a sleeper play, he's going to have really high ownership if Halliburton ends up missing the game. TJ McConnell didn't really do much last game with no Halliburton, only played 16 minutes, so I'm not crazy about him if Halliburton misses the game. Benedict Mathurin had a decent game last game with no Halliburton, so maybe throw him into a few. But a nice little sleeper play if Halliburton ends up missing the game is Ben Shepherd. He got you 25 and 29 minutes in the last two games without Halliburton. Didn't do much with those minutes, but if he ends up getting 25 to 29 minutes again, he does have the potential to score mid to low 20s. And if he does that at $3,800, he could end up being in the number one lineup. But all that's a moot point if Halliburton ends up playing. I do like throwing him into maybe 10 to 20% of your lineups because you take a look at his game log. He's gotten you, 4 50-plus point games in his last 10, including his very last game. He had 68.7. So you got to get some exposure to Halliburton. Siakam at $8,000, you'll definitely want to get some exposure to him, regardless of whether Halliburton plays or not, just because he could easily get you 50. So definitely want to consider some Siakam. Miles Turner hasn't been doing too well recently. He's only averaging 26.9 over his last 5 games. But with that being said, maybe you want to throw him into 5% just because there's not a whole lot of value at center tonight. And he has a pretty high ceiling. But no one else from the Pacers I'm really crazy about. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next game now. You got Toronto at Golden State. Now, the Raptors have been without Grady Dick or RJ Barrett for a few games now. You got Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quickly, going to have pretty low ownership. Maybe you consider throwing them into 5% of your lineups, each of those guys, because they can potentially get you 50 plus. And if Quickly gets you 50 plus at $6,800, that breaks the whole slate. But with that being said, a lot of people think the Raptors have been taken recently, and Barnes and Quickly haven't been getting that many minutes. Low 30s to high 20s minutes. Your star players when they're getting that low minutes, there is something going on there. They probably are tanking. So yeah, I'm not going to go too crazy with them. Pirtle and Orlando Robinson have been splitting minutes, so Pirtle at $7,100, not crazy about him. And no one else really I'm crazy about at their prices on Toronto. Toronto's too much of a wild card. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at Golden State now. Steph Curry under 9,000. He's coming back tonight. You definitely want to get some exposure to him. Jimmy Butler at 8,200. You might want to consider him. He could end up finishing in the mid 40s. Draymond Green at $6,700. I like throwing Draymond Green into the center spot. Podziemski had a pretty good game, his first game back. Finished with 27.9 in 29 minutes. Maybe his minutes go up a little bit more tonight, especially if Gary Payton ends up missing the game. I forgot to mention he's questionable. So I like potentially throwing Podziemski into a few lineups. Kuminga, not crazy about him at $5,300, especially with Podziemski back. Didn't really have a good game last game. Same goes to Moses Moody. 24 minutes last game, finished with 19 fantasy points. Now, at the center spot, Quentin Post is a guy I'm going to throw into maybe 10% of my lineups. He got you 23 points in 23 minutes last game. So, at $4,200 at that center spot, maybe he ends up being in that, top number one winning lineup. But yeah, that's pretty much everyone from Golden State. But let's go ahead and take a look at the next game now. You got Chicago at Sacramento. You got Josh Giddey, who's questionable. He played last night. I don't think it makes much of an impact whether or not he plays. I mean, Kobe White at $7,800. I like picking him up in around 10% of my lineups, regardless of whether or not Giddey plays, because he could get you 50 even with Josh Giddey. Vucevic at that center spot. I keep talking about that center spot. He could get you, mid 40s, and that'll end up being in the number one lineup potentially. Trey Jones, not crazy about his price, $6,800. I think that's pretty expensive. Same goes to Herter and Buzelis. So no one else I'm really crazy about. If Josh Giddey ends up playing, do you end up getting some exposure to him? I think so. I mean, he's coming off of a pretty good game, 47. And look at his past four games, 47, 47, 58, and 49. At $8,000, those are pretty good numbers. He even got you a 60-point game on February 22nd. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at Sacramento now. And for Sacramento, they have a pretty good matchup going up against Chicago. Malik Monk, DeRozan, Zach LaVine, if he ends up playing, they're going to be pretty high owned. There's going to be a lot of people that late swap Zach LaVine into the lineup if he ends up playing. So they're all going to be pretty high owned. So naturally, you're going to get some exposure to them when you run the optimizer. You'll want to get some exposure to Valanciunas. Has a really good matchup going up against Chicago, averaging just 23 in his last 5 games. But still, he puts up pretty big numbers in the minutes that he does play, and he could easily get you 40 points in 25 to 30 minutes. Besides that, the only other guy I would throw into these lineups is Trey Lyles, especially if Zach LaVine ends up missing the game. He should be a pretty decent sleeper play at $4,200. Good matchup. And last game, he had a pretty big game last game, had 30 minutes and finished with 32 fantasy points. If he does that again or something close to that, he could end up breaking the slate. But let's go ahead and take a look at the last game now. You got Milwaukee up against the Lakers. Obviously, you want to get some exposure to Giannis. Same with Dame Lillard. Giannis could get you 60. Dame could get you 50. Not crazy about Kuzma. He hasn't done much recently at all. Same with Kevin Porter and Gary Trent. But I really like Brook Lopez as a sleeper play tonight, projected for 9.9% ownership and under $6,000, coming off of 3 pretty poor games, but he's still getting you, 32 minutes in each of those games, and he's a much better player than that, so I don't expect that trend to continue. So at $5,800, he's a guy that I'm actually going to boost up to 20% minimum exposure. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the Lakers now. Obviously, the Lakers are still without LeBron. You got Luka, $12,000, pretty expensive, but he's expensive for a reason. He could give you 60 plus easily, so you definitely want to get some Luka exposure. Austin Reeves, they boosted him up to $8,700, which is really expensive, but there's a reason for that as well. 48, 51, 48, and 74. So you want to get some exposure to him. Now, that being said, those were against really bad defenses. Oh, and this is actually a new feature that I just added. You could see the defense versus position in his game log. And right away, you see that those last 4 matchups that he played well were all pretty good matchups. And tonight's a much more difficult matchup going up against Milwaukee. So I'm not going to go too crazy with Austin Reeves at $8,700. Jordan Goodwin, though, at $4,700, he's a guy you want to get some exposure to. At $4,700, he's getting you a ton of minutes recently. So he's a guy that I'm going to boost up. Dorian Finney-Smith at $4,300. I'll get at least 5% exposure to him just because he gets you high minutes as well. Dalton Connect at $4,500. Not crazy about him as a fantasy player. He scores a decent amount of points, but he doesn't really get you much of other stats. But maybe you consider throwing him into some lineups with no LeBron, just in case he gets you high 20s to low 30s, which he's capable of. But besides that, there's no one else that I'm really crazy about on the Lakers. But yeah, that's pretty much all of the games. Now, I promised I was going to run 150 lineups. I already did that, so let's come over here to last run. And as you can see, it's picking up a lot of Malik Monk, Zach LaVine, and DeMar DeRozan just because they have a great matchup going up against Charlotte. A lot of Miles McBride, who's someone I talked about fading. A lot of Draymond, Mikal Bridges, Kuminga, Josh Hart. If you take a look at this top lineup here, Miles McBride, Malik Monk, Mikal Bridges, Zach LaVine, Zaire Williams, DeMar DeRozan, Josh Hart, Jonathan Kuminga, and Nick Claxton. Take a look at this total projection, 299.8. So right now, there's not a whole lot of value in tonight's slate. I don't like having this much exposure to these guys on the Kings. So I went ahead and edited some of the exposure settings. First, I did a global exposure cap of 70%. And you can do that by coming over here to rules and checking this box and then putting in here 70. And then I also went through and I edited some of these exposures for a bunch of these players. And actually, our optimizer is the only one that I'm aware of where you can go in and edit your exposure settings, and then you can save it as a template. That way, you can access it later on. So, for example, let's say we wanted to get Luka in at least 50% of our lineups. This is just an example. I don't actually agree with that. Let's come over here and hit Save Template, and then you'll see global exposure cap of 70%, minimum exposure of 50% for Luka, and then 150 lineups. That's what I have it set to. So I actually already went ahead and did that. If you come over here to templates, I already saved a template. And I'll go over this just to kind of show you where my head is at. I really like Brook Lopez tonight. Got a minimum exposure of 20% on him. Vucevic, want to get at least 5% of him. Jimmy Butler, 5%. Dorian Finney-Smith, 5%. Dame, 10%. Taurean Prince, 10%. Giannis, 10%. Campaign at $3,800, 5% just in case. Trey Lyles, 10%. Towns, at least 10%. Luka, at least 5%. Miles Bridges, at least 5%. Kobe White, 5%. Daquan Jeffries, 5%. Halliburton, 10%. Quickly, 5%. LaMelo, 5%. Scotty Barnes, 5%. Austin Reeves, minimum 5%. Jordan Goodwin, 15%. Because actually, even though he's a great value, for some reason the optimizer's not picking him up a lot. Andrew Nembhard, 5%. Mark Williams, 5% at that center spot. Ben Shepherd, 5%. Noah Clowney, 5%. Dalton Connect, 5%. Quentin Post, 10%. And I actually already went ahead and ran these lineups. If you come over here to this tab, you'll see these lineups. You'll see that DeMar and Monk are capped at 70%. And I actually already went ahead and saved these lineups. So let's come over here to the Sims tool. And I already ran it. What I did was I hit configure contest, 25% payout to first place, kept it at that. Then I came over here to import lineups, and I imported those 150 lineups that I had with my exposure settings. And then I went to simulate slate ROI, and it simulated the slate, and then it sorted it by ROI and automatically favorited the top 150 lineups. So you'll see all of the lineups that I imported are highlighted green. If we come over here and we filter for that, filter for imported lineups, you'll see I got about 8 of them in the top 150. So let's go ahead and come over here to player exposure and see what we're working with. Loves Malik Monk tonight, 73%. I'm actually going to lower that. I'm going to take him out of 10 lineups. Right now he's in 110 out of 150. Let's put him in 100 lineups. Now you see he's at 66.67%. But let's go ahead and filter this by leverage to see who we have some leverage on. And I really like Zaire Williams tonight. The field has him at 20.96%, and we have him at 42%. But then it also likes Podziemski, has 16% leverage on him. So I like that. Noah Clowney at $3,900. It really likes him with no Cam Johnson. Draymond Green, it's putting into the center spot a lot, I noticed. So it has some leverage from him there. You have some leverage with Campaign, 4.26% projected ownership, and the Sims picked him up 12% of the time. So at $3,800, he could be someone who breaks the slate. Andrew Nembhard is another one I talked about. Jordan Goodwin, 7%. The Sims have him at 12.67%. So yeah, you can really see who the Sims are favoring. But that's pretty much all I have for this video. Make sure you guys shoot this video a like, and good luck to everyone tonight.